In any event, however, there was undoubtedly a tradition that descended into Egypt from a still earlier source, a tradition based upon an internal development of spiritual resources, a development which went back perhaps to India or to one of the ancient civilizations that have now vanished away. But by 4,000 or 5,000 or even 10,000 B.C., there was a great knowledge in the hands or in the keeping of a few persons. And these few persons more or less set up the system of mysteries which operated in Egypt, Greece, and the Roman Empire. Now, in this also, I think it is very important to bear in mind that the initiate system, which was the prevailing system in Egypt at that time, was based upon one tremendous point, a point which we have lost, a point which we have never really attempted to restore, but about which we have given considerable thought and consideration. The purposes of the mysteries, according to such initiates as Plotinus, Proclus, Iamblichus, Ammonius Saccas, and others, was very simple: that the individual should learn factually, truly, beyond question, beyond doubt, through personal experience, that death is an illusion, that immortality is the summit of man's problem, that the ancients not only believed in it, but kept this belief in secret, but developed a science by means of which they could communicate the fact and example and circumstance of death directly to another person. In other words, the initiates of the mysteries, according to the old concepts, were persons who had lived, died, and been born again in this world. In order to accomplish this, there was an elaborate ritual system, because upon the concept of immortality was built the entire problem of an enduring material culture in this world. If immortality was demonstrable, beyond question, not the result of communication, not because certain famous person had believed it, not because we wanted to believe it, or because it was written in sacred books, or anything of that nature, but because the individual who believed it had died, passed through the experience, and come back to life. This was the burden of the mystery system, was to prove conclusively that death was not the end of anything. Cicero marks this in his discussion of his relationships with life. Marcus Aurelius refers to it. But he refers to it, as they all did, as something known, not something believed. Something that could not be denied because it had been an actual experience in the life of the believer. Thus, in the mystery system, in the Egyptian, which we are interested in the moment particularly, the Book of the Dead, which is a misnomer, part of the same type of misnomer that afflicts us in many other ways. The Book of the Dead, so called, the Egyptian name for which was not the Book of the Dead, but the Book of the Coming Forth by Day and of the Opening of the Mouth. This was the famous name in ancient times for such great papyri as are in the museum of the British Museum, of the Papyrus of Ani and the Papyrus of Hanufa. These were great examples of the dead coming back to life through the mysteries. Therefore, the ancient philosophy of life was built upon an eternality of life. It was built upon the fact that the individual was for everlastingness, that he would go on. There was no end to him. There was no one converting people to this. There was no one preaching it or teaching it. In the mysteries, the candidate went through it himself as an actual fact. And as Apuleius tells us in the Metamorphosis, the initiate in the temple tread upon the threshold of Persephone, that is the underworld, and beheld the spirits. He went into the realm of death and returned again. Eugene O'Neill's play, Lazarus Laughed, is built upon this theme and is derived very largely from the ancient teachings. In the play, Lazarus, as had been raised from the dead by Christ, lived on for a time and was finally persecuted in Rome by the Emperor Caligula. And finally Caligula threatened Lazarus with death, and Lazarus laughed at him. The man who had died laughed at the man who thought he could kill anything. And this was the burden of the mystery. That the individual who knew, not because he could believe or have faith, but because through the rites, ceremonies, and esoteric practices of the temple, he lived through it and came through alive, and came out of darkness into light, knew as a certainty beyond question that there was no death.